So take my hand, I'll start my journey, free from all the helpless worry that besets a man when he's alone. Yes, I love you and I know you love me.
But I am into the intellectual thing. I went to college. I studied the great philosophers, Socrates. I studied Plato. And, you learn the important things. Like if you're studying geology, which is all facts, as soon as you get out of school, you forget it all, because it's just numbers and things. But philosophy, you remember just enough to screw you up for the rest of your life. And you studied the important, like ethical questions. Is it okay to yell movie in a crowded firehouse? Religious questions. Does the Pope shit in the woods? Keep waiting sometime, oh. If there is a God, give me a sign. See, I told you that the... Wouldn't it be weird if you died and you woke up and you were in heaven? Just like they always told you. And everybody had wings on and pearly gates. Wouldn't you feel stupid? Oh no! You mean that this is what? Oh! In college they said this was all bullshit. Oh, well... I'll just come in and... What? You been keeping records on me? Well, it wasn't so bad. How many times did I take the Lord's name in vain? Ugh. 1,000,006. Oh. Jesus Christ.
Spanky McFarland.
Hi, Spanky. So you're going to the party too, eh? Yeah. You know how an airplane goes? How does an airplane go? I don't know. Don't you? I had a biplane, and an airplane had a wreck. Did it have a wreck? That airplane had Yeah. And you know what the rat did? What? He climbed up. And then when he got up in his place, he fell off. And when he got wrestling real hard, when he got stand up there, he fell off.
I wish there were only 2 days in the week, Christmas and Saturdays. That line, said by an early version of Porky, was my introduction to the Little Rascals. It is my earliest memory of seeing the Little Rascals on TV. Little Rascals, or as they were referred to when they were in theaters, the R-Gang comedies, were featured heavily in the mid-70s through the 80s and up to the early 90s on local Saturday morning afternoon television, packaged and aimed at kids my age as viewers. As a result, I grew up watching the Little Rascals, Laurel and Hardy, and Three Stooges as often as possible, usually early Saturday or Sunday mornings, or after 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon on weekdays. These types of theatrical shorts that were played before feature films in the movie theaters in the late 20s through the 30s and 40s and early 50s, repackaged for Saturday morning television, is really where my comedy sensibilities begin. The originally titled R-Gang comedies began in 1922 and ran through 1944. To continue to connect each of these chapters of the history of comedy together, these short comedies were distributed through the company that Hal Roach distributed Harold Lloyd films. Interesting side note, one of the original cast members of the R-Gang comedies was Harold Lloyd's nephew, who he pulled out of the cast after only a year to go to military school. These comedies, like all film comedies, started out silent, and Hal Roach switched distribution companies in 1927 from Pathé to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, entering into the R-Gang comedy's most popular period after converting to sound in 1929. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In order to truly discuss the R-Gang comedies, and the next chapter of the history of comedy for this month as well, I must talk about Hal Roach. Hal Roach is truly one of the original pioneers, creators, and innovators of American comedy as we know it. As a filmmaker, he is single-handedly responsible for Harold Lloyd, The Little Rascals, R-Gang comedies, and Laurel and Hardy alone, not to mention countless other less popular and less well-known short series and comedic actors and actresses, including some of the first character actors ever in Hollywood history. After a close analyzation of the comedies and listening to different self-proclaimed experts and or fans and historians like Leonard Maltin and others in documentaries and biographies talk about the R-Gang comedies, I've come to the conclusion that Hal Roach is also the first employer in American history to practice and promote race integration amongst his actors and treat all actors, whether white or black, equally. If Hal Roach had listened to the old Hollywood adage, never work with children or animals, he wouldn't have ever worked in Hollywood at all. Hal Roach was born in Elmira, New York in 1892. He lived an adventurous life in his youth, one that even brought him to live in Alaska for a while, until he eventually ended up in Hollywood in 1912. He started work as an extra in silent films until after he received an inheritance and began to make his own short comedies in 1915 with his friend Harold Lloyd. Roach purchased a large amount of land from Harry Culver in Culver City. This became Hal Roach Studios. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, Hal Roach employed Harold Lloyd, Charlie Chase, Will Rogers, Thelma Todd and Zazu Pitts, and most famously Laurel and Hardy. But right next to Laurel and Hardy is probably the most well-known and recognizable early cinematic comedy series, the R-Gang comedies, based on the activities of poor street children, witnessed by Hal Roach out his office window one summer afternoon. Before he even realized what he was doing, he had been watching these street kids fight over a stick for 15 or 20 minutes. These kids They had these sticks and they were using them as canes and guns and swords, he said. You name it. Those kids were fighting over those sticks like they were valuable toys, and the imaginations these kids had, the ingenuity and inventiveness to create cars out of buckets and trash cans and tricycle wheels. Roach thought to himself, I wonder if I could turn this into some kind of series, get a couple films out of it. Well, a couple films indeed. There are 220 Our Gang comedies, including one feature film entitled General Spanky. As I said before, the Our Gang comedies started out as silent films, and the original lineup of the Our Gang cast is not the lineup that we all fondly remember. In fact, the lineup that is most popular of the Our Gang comedies, that includes Buckwheat, Darla, Spanky, Alfalfa, and Porky, didn't come into play until 1933. Spanky is the one who ushered in the new direction and new style of the Our Gang kids. Up to this point, with the exception of maybe Jackie Cooper, the Our Gang kids were pretty much visually comedic and chosen for their looks. But after a few years of talkies and finding out that a lot of these kids couldn't really act, Hal had to recast. The first new breed of little rascal to come in was Spanky McFarland. He had all kinds of attitude and character. He was an old soul who loved to spin yarns and tell stories. In fact, Spanky McFarland's screen test audition was so entertaining to Hal Roach and the rest of the crew that they actually turned it into a short.
George Robert Phillips McFarland modeled baby clothes in Dallas, Texas. His aunt sent clippings to Roach, was summoned for a screen test, and became the most popular character in Our Gang.
Hello, Baba. That's funny. Oh, look at this funny thing. Look what goes that.
Spanky received his nickname from a Hollywood columnist. He was an exceptional toddler and had seen the Roach staff would film disjointed scenes to insert in unreleased films just to take advantage of his beguiling presence. Even a screen test was used. Today, whether George or Spanky, McFarland is the leader he was later to become in relationship to the gang. Very direct and in charge.
Dialogue wasn't really a lot of problem because when you were very young, you didn't have any. And it was mostly visual stuff. And they would just turn the camera on and the director would direct you from beside the camera and attempt to get you to do what he wanted you to do. A lot of times that was also done, like in my early films, in the one film which was part of my screen test, where I was trying to hit a bug. The director would simply talk to me, Bob McGowan, and say, hit the bug, Spanky, hit the bug, Spanky. And where I made some kind of a response to the bug, or Pete the dog, or when I laughed or something like that, was a reaction simply from what I was doing.
Here's a rare glimpse of Spanky, the real little boy, caught in a home movie taken by Roach head photographer Art Lloyd on a spring day in Southern California.
It's like a hillbilly from the radio. Remarkable. It was like the monkeys there, and they had on full overcoats. They all went like this. One day, a girl got lost in the woods, and her name was Jane. Tarzan liked her, too. And then he made monkey money signs for her. It went like this. Then he ducked her in the water, and did she get mad? Boy, did they have fun climbing around the tree. Pretty soon, a big old lion comes up, and he says, over there is a big old rhinoceros with a toothpick on his nose. Over there's some billy goats and they had handlebars on their head. Over there was a big old crocodile, and when he opened his mouth, he didn't have any face. He only had tonsils. Remarkable. Shut up. And he standing right between the eyes, and he fell down there, and he got up, and he ran away way off behind the bushes. Remarkable. Can't you say anything but remarkable? Yeah. I love when people say it. Remarkable.
By 1938, Roach had lost interest in the Our Gang series and was more focused on and interested in developing Laurel and Hardy as a comedy team. So he sold the whole kit and caboodle, cast, crew, copyright, and all, to MGM. But the shorts that MGM were producing lacked the spirit of the Hal Roach produced comedies. The heart was gone, and only a few films into the MGM version of the series, I think the bigwigs at MGM realized this. So they sort of turned the series into a big morality play with public service messages of the times used as plot points, like a propaganda film. By 1944, it was time to call it quits, and the last Our Gang comedy was produced by MGM was released, entitled Dancing Romeo. Almost 10 years later, in 1955, the Our Gang comedies were licensed to television, but due to the fact that they were not owned by Hal Roach Studios anymore, or MGM for that matter, the company that brought the Our Gang comedies to Saturday morning television had to call them something else. During their theatrical release days, they had often been referred to in opening title cards as Hal Roach's Rascals, so they decided to call them the Little Rascals. Now this is why the series goes by two names, something I always wondered about since I was a kid. Now, you're probably wondering why I didn't talk about Alfalfa much, and basically that's because the real comedic talent of the Our Gang Little Rascals comedies was Spanky McFarland. Darla Hood a close second, and actually even Porky and Buckwheat before Alfalfa. I never liked Alfalfa. I never thought that he was funny. He was more annoying than funny, the whole off-key singing shit like that. Apparently he was an absolute asshole too, a real piece of shit. Total hillbilly from northern Illinois, never wore a pair of shoes until the day he showed up on the set. Big bully, in general an all-around dickhead. He died like a punk bitch too, over $50, shot and bled to death in the street. And that's the name of that tune.